Today's mission is to decode the World War II movie, The Heroes of Telemark. Relate it to the real mission, Operation Gunnerside, and look at some current discoveries. This is the mission that changed the course of the war and stopped the Nazis from developing an atomic bomb. This is Dan.
And Tom.
From our podcast, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, and our website, SpyMovieNavigator.com, the premier go-to resources for spy movie fans. All right, let's go. You know, this is all about World War II and the fight with the Germans. Now, as an aside, I've been rewatching the entire series of Hogan's Heroes.
Oh, man.
A television show in the U.S., which ran 168 episodes, 6 seasons, from September 17th, 1965 to April 4th, 1971. And really, we should do an episode on this sometime because Hogan's Heroes were spies. They were doing espionage in every episode. So I want to do that. I think that'd be fun.
I'll have to do some rewatching. I haven't watched it in like 50 years.
Yeah.
But today we're decoding a movie about some real heroes, namely the Heroes of Telemark.
Yeah.
So The Heroes of Telemark is a 1965 spy movie starring Kirk Douglas, Richard Harris, and Ulla Jacobson, based on a key real mission in World War II. We'll see the unfolding of the attempt by the Allies to thwart the Nazi development of an atomic bomb.
Yeah.
Now, the focus was to prevent the Nazis from producing enough heavy water to use in their atomic bomb project.
Yeah. In real life, the outcome of the war really hinged on this mission. The Nazis were on the cutting edge of technology and were producing weapons and equipment in many ways better than the Allies. They had the V-2 rockets, they were testing additional weapons, jet engines, and they were in the throes of developing an atomic bomb. Imagine if they had developed it in time, what the world would look like today.
Well, that's true. But I will say, in researching this thing, I found some debate as to how far Germany really was along in the development of the atomic bomb. Because you have to remember, many of their key scientists, like Einstein, they were Jews who fled Germany.
Yeah.
And so they had a huge drain of scientific knowledge leave the country. I've seen differing takes on how far along they were, but in any case, they needed heavy water from this plant to help them.
Yeah. I mean, this is true. Many scientists and scholars today, that's the key, think that Nazi Germany's nuclear weapons program was not close to developing a usable atomic bomb during World War II. The program faced several challenges, including lack of priority, using heavy water instead of graphite, strategic bombings, inability to separate isotopes, lack of a method to enrich uranium, inability to achieve a successful chain reaction. They had a lot of issues.
But at the time, would the Allies assume this and figure, hey, no worries? No. They'd act as though Germany was close because the risk was losing the war. And this is the key part of this movie. It's really important you understand this background for the movie to make sense.
Yeah. Now we got to look back and know that Germany invaded and took over Norway in 1940. There, they commandeered a plant to produce heavy water, a necessary ingredient for the reactor for developing an atomic bomb.
Hey, Dan, we didn't do a shout out. So let's give a shout out to a couple of our listeners who gave us some feedback on some of our recent episodes. We love hearing from you. So a big shout out to Andy James Barclay. Again, thank you so much. And Pietro Rossi, thank you again. And Carl Epler, thank you. Yeah. And there's another repeat.
Cool.
Thank you all for the feedback. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to the movie description. The movie focuses on the Allied effort to stop this effort to get the heavy water so they could produce an atom bomb. Kirk Douglas plays Dr. Rolf Peterson, who knows much about heavy water. Richard Harris is Knut Stroud, a Norwegian resistance leader, and Ulla Jacobson, who plays Anna.
Okay, now this is a movie. It's not a documentary. And so these parts are not exactly the real people in real life. But we'll go into a little bit more of that later. Plus, the movie itself makes this thing look like one big mission. And we're going to talk through this because it wasn't just one big mission. It was a series of missions that they put together in the movie. And then one other thing, I've got to add this, because if you're a younger listener, Richard Harris, he was 35 at the time, who played Knut. Younger listeners may know him as Dumbledore in the first 2 Harry Potter movies. And unfortunately, he died before the second one was released, but they got it filmed. But if that's the only role you've seen him play, this is a very different role. And of course, Harris plays it well.
Absolutely. And yeah, we have trains, planes, chases, and explosions. But this is a story. that develops at its own pace, so there are not a lot of action sequences. Though we have a spectacular snow skiing chase scene here 5 years before James Bond ever skied on snow in any in-productions movie, like On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So this is worth a watch just for that.
Yeah, I'll admit that it was very cool to see that.
Yeah.
But what they did 5 years later in Majesties, Willie Bogner Jr. figured out how to do that skiing backwards with the camera between his legs,
Oh yeah.
which is a much better way to film ski sequences.
Yeah.
But because that hadn't been developed, this was still very well done.
Yeah, and I felt the snow ski chase here was, you really felt the cold. I mean, I thought they did a good job in that. All right, here's the plot synopsis so we can know what's going on in this movie. In German occupied Norway since 1940, the Nazis are using the Vemork Norsk hydro plant in the town of Rjukan, Telemark, to produce heavy water. Heavy water could potentially be used in the manufacture of an atomic bomb.
Okay, let me jump in here again, Dan, because we've both used the word heavy water today.
Yeah.
And so let's kind of explain that a little bit because we talk about it being used with the atomic bomb, and a lot of people don't know what it is. So deuterium, when combined with oxygen, is what we call heavy water.
Oh, wow.
And it was discovered in 1931. In the movie, they do show us the correct scientific notation of D2O for what heavy water is.
Yeah, D2O, yeah.
And this plant was a real plant built in 1934. And it was already creating heavy water for Norway and the scientific community.
I think they were using it for fertilizer or something, weren't they?
Yeah, it was the only plant doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And one thing that I read about this said that the plant supplied heavy water that was created as a byproduct of fertilizer production.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
And they did that because Norway has very little farmland if you look at the landscape.
right.
So they needed to double crop. They needed to get crops out twice a year. And the fertilizer helped them do that.
Yeah. All right.
So the byproduct, heavy water.
Yeah. All right. So they were already producing heavy water. All right. So Dr. Rolf Peterson, played by Kirk Douglas, is a Norwegian physics professor, initially content to wait out the war. But he's pulled into the struggle by local resistance leader Knut Stroud, portrayed by Richard Harris, based on the real person in real life, Knut Haukelid.
Who are you?
I'm Knut Stroud. I used to work on the sawmills, but now I fight Nazis.
It's one of those. Get back to your sawmill. I'm not interested in your messages. My work is here. Understand?
Rolf's ex-wife, Anna, also becomes involved, reigniting their relationship. Now, Rolf and Knut sneak out of Norway on a hijacked passenger steamship to deliver microfilmed plans of the hydroelectric plant to the British. Impressed by the information, the British plan a commando raid against the plant. When their force of Royal Engineers is shot down over Norway, Peterson and Stroud lead a small group of Norwegian saboteurs into the plant. The raid is successful, but the Germans quickly replace and repair the equipment. A traitor infiltrates the resistance group, leading to betrayal and danger.
Wait, a traitor? You mean there's a mole in a spy movie?
Yeah, I have a mole.
And there's this mole here in the spy movie. As I've researched this thing, I've not found a mole in real life.
Not in the real life, no. Rolf and Knut learn of German plans to ship steel drums of heavy water to Germany and must now put a plan together to thwart that mission by trying to sabotage the ferry carrying the drums and to sink it in the deepest part of the fjord.
Yeah, now we're going to dive into this in much more detail later in this episode. But we should point out that, as I said before, the movie is not 100% accurate as to the real mission, but it definitely captures the essence of all of the missions involved in this effort. And again, it gives us a few different missions, namely Operations Grouse, Freshman, Gunnerside, the air bombing raids, and the sinking of the hydro ferry. And it's all combined into one story here, not as separate missions. So there are some liberties taken in this movie, which is not exactly surprising.
Yeah. All right. It's a good movie. So let's look at the key takeaways from the movie. The 1965 British war film, directed by Anthony Mann, was based on a true story of the Norwegian heavy water sabotage during the Second World War. Here are the takeaways that we want to focus on. The Norwegian resistance fighters. This is real stuff. The movie centers around Norwegian resistance fighters who carried out a daring sabotage mission. Their objective was to disrupt the heavy water plant in Telemark, Norway, which was vital for Nazi Germany's nuclear program. How they do this, the plans that are made, the infiltration of the plant, all of this causes tension throughout the movie. So you have this permeating the entire movie, and every second of the movie is how the heck are they going to stop them?
Well, most everything. I'll
Yeah.
tell you one of my big concerns with this movie in a bit. But one thing I do like here, and one key takeaway is the direction and the cinematography here were done very well.
Yeah.
Now, you said Anthony Mann was the director, and he did a marvelous job of creating many scenes that keep you wondering if these resistance fighters made the right choices and if they could possibly be successful given the odds.
Yeah.
This plant was well protected by the Germans, and with its location, geography helped protect it as well. And the infiltration depended on getting detailed floor plans of the plant, where the heavy water was being produced in the plant, and potential access points. I mean, there were dead drops of film, a gripping sense of what occupied Norway must have felt like, and the dominance of the Germans and the momentum they were creating in building the first atomic weapon.
Yeah, it's frightening. Yeah, Anthony Mann directed some big movies in his time too, including The Glenn Miller Story, 1954, Men in War, 1957, and El Cid, 1961, and lots of others like Spartacus, The Fall of the Roman Empire, and Gods of the Laker. I mean, the guy's done some great stuff.
What a lightweight to do a thing on heavy water.
Yeah.
Sorry. That sounded like one of your puns. All right. So we know the direction was solid, and so was the cinematography. And
Yeah.
there are many shots where the action is taking place not in the center of the screen, but on both edges, often at the same time. It was a
Yeah.
very interesting technique for how they did this.
Well, the cinematographer Robert Krasker was Australian born, and he also had done The Third Man, El Cid, again, he worked with Mann, A Brief Encounter, and Romeo and Juliet. So here, the snow scenes, I think, are spectacular.
Absolutely.
The chases, the tumbling in and through the snow, the cabin and town scenes, all first rate. Fantastic stuff. The snowy vistas and ski chase were wonderfully done. Filmed largely in Norway, the movie benefits from picturesque snowy landscapes and the commandos trudging through snowdrifts, wind whistling in the background. This creates an immersive atmosphere. It's an exciting ski chase that predates similar sequences in later films like we mentioned on Her Majesty's Secret Service and Snow Job. The wintry visuals here, I think, enhance the overall experience of watching this movie and creating an atmosphere of tension. You really get a feel for being there and almost feel the cold. Again, worth a watch just for the cinematography. It is very good throughout. Great lighting, great sound as well. Wonderful.
Yeah. And for me, the way they shot this, I mean, as beautiful as it was shot, it does not make me want to go to that area of Norway. And it's by design. The area does exist, and it's quite remote and desolate and isolated and cold and dark. And the winter is supposedly almost unlivable. There's a lot of military training in that area, but they don't do it much in the winter. So this was a real place that this plant was. And the cinematography just captures and envelops into the isolation of the place.
Yeah, it does.
Now, another thing besides just the landscape and everything is the set pieces. I mean, they had some pretty exciting set pieces here.
They did. It was good.
Yeah. So some of the scenes include the hijacking of a ship,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
explosive raid on the factory, the dramatic sinking of the ferry that was carrying the heavy water at the end.
That was very cool.
And yeah, so these action sequences add to the excitement and tension of the film. And they were key focus points that were well executed by the cast, the director, the cinematographer, and the writers.
And really, in summary, while the acting received praise, the film's focus on some top action sequences and suspense sometimes, I think, overshadowed the character development, but not in any great extent. I thought it was okay. But the casting,
Well, it
you're
depends on
talking
which characters you're developing. And
Yeah,
some of them I
well,
liked and
yeah,
some I didn't.
every movie has to decide. You can't develop every character to every deep extent that you'd like to in any movie because you got an hour and a half, you got 2 hours or whatever. But let's look at the casting. The casting was fantastic. Kirk Douglas was solid as Rolf Peterson, yet the acting in the Heroes of Telemark received mixed reviews. with both positive and critical assessments. For example, Kirk Douglas and Richard Harris. Kirk Douglas playing the role of Dr. Rolf Peterson and Richard Harris playing the role of Knut Straub injected star power into the film. Their performances were commendable, especially considering the challenging circumstances they faced. The chemistry between the two characters evolves from initial detest to mutual respect and liking each other during their dangerous mission, which was great to see as these characters and relationships developed on screen. That was cool.
That was cool. Now I'm going to jump in again. Here's an aside, totally out of left field. I know that some movie fans pay attention to these things. So Dan, did you catch the type of watch that Dr. Peterson was wearing in this movie? James Bond fans seem to like to follow those watches. So what was it here?
Yeah, I have no idea what that watch was because I didn't pay attention.
Well, there's a really big close-up of it. And
Okay.
it was a Bernex Barracuda watch. So
Okay.
all of you movie watch collectors, here's another one for you to track down. Very prominent in this movie.
Yeah, that was a good catch. All right.
All right. So let's then talk about the supporting cast. And despite the strong performances, some viewers found the characters to be somewhat one-dimensional. And we've talked about this in other episodes. It's
Mhm.
hard to really develop all the supporting characters. And
Yeah.
we thought this was a little surprising given that director Anthony Mann's earlier Westerns were known for emphasizing characterizations over action.
Yeah, I agree. There were some leaps here in terms of development. For instance, Kirk Douglas's sudden transition from this university professor, reluctant to get involved in this mission, to a gun-carrying commando leader, can certainly raise some eyebrows simply because it seemed to lack sufficient and efficient development. It was odd, I thought. Not that he did a bad job acting, but that the situation seemed to be a bit unrealistic. But in war, hey, anything can happen, I guess. You can change your mind. And Mann compensated for the character depth with these thrilling set pieces like you were talking about. So that one part got me, I think.
Yeah, now
But,
this was a 2 hour and 11-minute movie. How much time do you want to spend
well, that's the key.
on
That's
the
always the question.
developing there, right? Now, I have another thing that can totally cut that would have made this a shorter movie. Plus, part of what happens with Rolf may have come from what really happened in the missions. So after Operation Grouse and Freshman failed, the resistance fighters spent the winter hunkered down in a shack. And we see there's a shack there and there's some people in
They
it.
have it in the movie. Yeah.
But there were all these different people that were involved in this thing, and they were from different walks of life. So somebody might have been a mathematician, and somebody might have been a cook, or whatever it was. They cross-trained each other for something to do while they sat out a winter in this shack. Everybody picked up a lot of different skill sets. So it's possible the movie doesn't show that with Rolf, but that might be how he got this knowledge because of this cross-training that happened in real life.
Yeah, I mean, you see him get the revelation when he's looking at the film and he's got the diagrams of the plant and so on. And he's like, oh, his eyes kind of go up and he's like, okay, I get it. So it could be. Of course, we don't see any of that kind of real development in the Heroes of Telemark of his character to think that way, but it's possible. We have some others in the cast who us spy movie fans might recognize, right?
They're absolutely. And so this is a little bit of a list here. So hold on here. The first one I want to point out is Sir Michael Redgrave. He plays the character Uncle, and he had the lead. And we talked about him when we did our episode on Hitchcock's The Lady Vanishes.
Yeah, he was awesome in The Lady Vanishes.
Yeah, he absolutely. Yeah. He also had a small role in Hitchcock's Secret Agent.
Yeah, he was good.
Now, one thing we see with the character of Uncle is a geographic and in current timing thing that happens. I'm not exactly sure how to say this, but twice in the movie, he opens this cabinet door and there's a picture of the king in Norway there. So the king that was the king at the time of the events of this movie. And that is King Haakon the Seventh. And we love seeing stuff like this in movies. It pulls the reality in because this is based on some reality here. Now, Karl Stepanek played Henrik Jacobson in The Second Best Agent in the Whole Wide World. He was also in Operation Crossbow, Our Man in Havana, and others. So another spy movie common character actor we see. James Bond fans pay attention because Jeffrey Keane is in here playing General Bolt.
Yes.
Bond fans will know him as the Ministry of Defense Sir Frederick Gray in Moonraker, The Spy Who Loved Me, For Your Eyes Only, A View to a Kill, and
Living Daylights too.
he was also in The Spy Who Came In from the Cold.
Ah,
So, and of course, don't forget another movie we reviewed. He was in that spy spoof, #1 of the Secret Service.
Yeah.
We've got an episode on that one.
yeah, we got an episode on that one. We've got Secret Agent. We've got The Lady Vanishes. We have episodes on all the stuff we just mentioned, actually. That was an odd role for him, though, in #1 of the Secret Service.
Yes. All right, a few more here. Anton Diffring, who I really liked here, played
Mm.
Major Frick.
Yeah.
10 years later, he played Heydrich in the movie Operation Daybreak, and he was also in Where Eagles Dare, SAS San Salvador, and more. Terrence Plummer, who played a thug in The Man with the Golden Gun. Maurice Denham was in Our Man in Havana, and Wolf Freeze was in Operation Crossbow.
Wow.
And then finally, Faith Brooks plays the role of a woman on a bus who asks a question.
Hmm.
She recognizes one of the team members and almost inadvertently gets him killed.
Yeah. Wow, that's quite a few. That's pretty cool. All right. Yeah, we just talked about her playing Lucy's mother in our episode on Donald Sutherland's movie, Eye of the Needle. She was terrific there in a relatively small part, but she was awesome there.
Yes, very good. And she does it. I mean, this is a small role here, but like all of these actors, they're all very talented actors, and they're giving us the background stuff we need.
Yeah, let's look at another takeaway, the fourth takeaway here, the personal conflicts and betrayal. Of course, you got to have that in most movies anyway. This movie portrays the conflicts faced by the characters, including Rolf's ex-wife, Anna, who also becomes involved in the resistance effort. Betrayal and personal dilemmas add tension to the story. The traitor infiltrates the group, as we mentioned, leading to dangerous situations. How they handle it in the movie is interesting, and as a viewer, we wonder what they will do.
Okay, now this is where I have my beef with the movie. Right?
Okay.
You talked about Anna. Now,
Yeah.
there's this romantic part with her and Rolf because she was his ex-wife.
She
And
is his ex-wife.
to me, it was quite unrealistic. It almost ruined the movie. It didn't exist in real life.
Oh, okay.
And so when we reviewed the movie Operation Mincemeat, which was based on another real operation called Operation Mincemeat, we complained about how the made-up romance killed that movie. It was a good movie if they just took that crap out of it. And here in the Heroes of Telemark, they do the exact same thing. And I don't know why they do it unless they feel they've got to bring in some female parts in here to get a wider audience. But you're talking about a dramatization of real stuff. Why do you have to pollute that dramatization, adding a romance thing that didn't exist? If it existed, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, it was just a side story and not really developed or focused on here, really. Not a lot, anyway. There were some scenes, and they probably could have skipped it.
Yeah,
And she
come
puts
off,
them off.
and they might have gotten it done in under 2 hours.
Yeah, but she puts them off pretty well. Look what she tells him.
You see, it's not so easy seducing your ex-wife. Students are much easier, aren't they? I just don't believe in you anymore.
I don't believe in you anymore. All right, let's look at another key takeaway element, number 5, the successful raid and the sinking of the heavy water on the ferry boat. Despite these challenges, the Norwegian saboteurs successfully raid the plant. When they learn of German plans to ship the steel drums of heavy water to Germany, they sabotage the ferry carrying the drums, causing it to sink in the fjord. Rolf himself in the movie ends up on the ferry improvising this life-saving game for the children on board because he knew what was going to happen, that the boat was going to blow up, and he wanted to save some of the innocent lives.
Yeah.
But,
Now, and so now this is another area where we have to remember this is not a documentary, it's a dramatization.
Yeah.
And with the sinking of the hydro ferry that you just talked about, it was really Knut Haukelid who was involved in both Operation Gunnerside and the hydro sinking. In the movie, Rolf was supposed to be Ronenberg, who was the leader of Operation Gunnerside. So they have the wrong character leading this hydro sinking in the movie. So it should have been Knut. And no, there was no game played for the children in the real operation.
No. Yep, movie stuff. Overall, The Heroes of Telemark provides a gripping portrayal of wartime espionage, sacrifice, and heroism. If you're interested in historical dramas and real life stories, this film's worth watching, though again, it's not a documentary on this mission. This movie is not 100% historically accurate, but it does accurately depict the historical drama that surrounded this particular juncture in the war and the high cost of war, with innocent lives being sacrificed at times, and the fortitude and bravery of those who fought and took on this enormous mission. It does take liberties with the story in terms of plot, timing, and a few other things, but it does capture the mission.
Okay, so it does capture the mission, but I do want to include a quote here from Joachim Runneberg, who was that real leader of Operation Gunnerside. When he
Yes.
was asked by the London Daily Telegraph, he said this of this movie, quote, "A hopeless portrayal. They took a true story and spun their own idea around it. It should never have been allowed," end of quote. So I
Wow.
think that he was right about this not being accurate. It is a compelling movie. And if they had just dropped the romance stuff, I think it was a pretty good movie.
You know, you look at that quote that you just did from the real leader, and you could understand it. I could understand it. Yeah. From the person who actually led the mission. Now you're going to be watching a movie about it, and there's little chance that it will do justice in your mind
We didn't do it that way. That's not how that happened.
because it was not a documentary. I understand his point that you can look at that and go, no, come on, please,
Yeah.
please, please. But was it a good movie as an entertainment movie? Yeah, it was a good movie. Did it capture the essence? It did. All right.
Okay, so that was the movie part. Let's dive into the real parts, right? Where were the real missions that they kind of put together into this movie?
Yeah, you look at Operation Gunnerside was a daring and pivotal mission during World War II. We must put the mission into perspective, though, and what was happening around it and prior to this mission. The objective, again, go blow up the heavy water plant. We know that at Vermork in occupied Norway. Heavy water was crucial to the German nuclear research, and the Allies wanted to prevent its use in developing atomic weapons. So the background: before the German invasion of Norway in 1940, the French Deuxième Bureau secretly removed 185 kilograms, 408 pounds of heavy water from the Vermork plant.
That doesn't sound like a
French
lot.
Yeah, the French transported it to safety. However, the plant remained operational, as we said earlier, and the Allies feared further production. So we have operations here that were successful, and we had operations here that failed. We mentioned Operation Grouse. In October 1942, the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, placed an advanced team of Norwegian commandos on the Hardanger Plateau above the plant.
Right. So this is the team we talked about who had to stay in that shack for the winter. Right.
Yeah.
And that had to be miserable. They were in one shack. They didn't have a lot to eat because they weren't supposed to be there that long. So,
Right.
They actually got a reindeer at one point and like feasted on that.
Yeah, a rough winter. And then we have another operation, Operation Freshman. We mentioned that. The following month, British paratroopers attempted to rendezvous with the Norwegians from Operation Grouse. Unfortunately, their gliders crashed, and most of the participants were killed or captured by the Gestapo. It's reported that 41 British service personnel, including aircrew, died, either in the crashes or executed by the Gestapo. And now we have Operation Gunnerside. So we had a couple of missions that really were tangent to this and supportive of Gunnerside, and one that completely failed. In February 1943, the SOE trained Norwegian commandos successfully destroyed the production facility. They infiltrated the plant, planted explosives, and disrupted heavy water production. They also wore British military gear and used British rifles because the Nazis, if they thought Norwegians were behind this raid, would execute Norwegian hostages to retaliate and teach the Norwegians not to fight the Nazis. They actually did this a number of times in real life, executing their captives whenever they thought the Norwegians were working against them. It was serious stuff and real.
Yeah, it was. And we talk about deception in many of our episodes here. And I really like the way that they portrayed this Nazi retaliation. Because when a Norwegian was caught trying to help out, he or she may or may not have been the one executed. Very often they executed a bunch of people from the town. So it was like, okay, I got caught doing this. I'm not necessarily the one who loses my life, or maybe I do, but so does my wife and the baker and the and the butcher or whatever. And so it's really,
Yeah.
it really sets up why they disguise themselves as Brits, because if a Norwegian was caught helping out, it was other townspeople that bore the brunt of it.
Yeah, and since the raid was successful, the Germans, though, were ready to rebuild and reinstall the facility and get back up and running on producing heavy water. So the Allies had a bombing raid on this plant as well. So following Gunnerside, the Allied bombing raids damaged further this plant, ensuring its shutdown, or at least the Germans rethinking their continuation of producing heavy water here, thinking they may be too vulnerable if they continued to attempt to produce heavy water in Telemark. They wanted to move the operation to Germany.
Yeah. Now, one other thing with this is in the movie, they kind of do something different to reality again in how the explosion and how the mission Gunnerside worked. Because in reality, these guys set this explosions off. They got out of there. The German guards didn't even know they were there. One of them heard something and goes and rattles the door, and it was locked to the room it was in. So they didn't even know. These guys got out of there. Nobody was killed. In the movie, that's not the case. But in reality, it was a small team. They went in, boom, got it done, and got out. And it took a little bit before the Germans knew there was a problem.
Yeah, they wanted to make it a little more dramatic in the movie with someone getting killed, and it didn't happen in real life. They got away. But, I mean, in real life, it was pretty damn dramatic anyway.
And in the movie, they didn't telegraph who was going to die too early.
No, right. All right. So the result of the Germans ceased operations at the Vermork plant, but there was still heavy water that had been produced. And so they planned on moving this remaining heavy water to Germany by ferry. However, Norwegian resistance forces boarded the ferry before it left and planted explosives with timers so that the explosives would explode when the ferry was in deep waters. It worked, and they sank the ferry carrying the heavy water on Lake Tin, which in Norwegian is Lake Inswa.
All right. So now history not only changed a little bit about how the attack actually happened, but history has changed their opinion on where the Nazis were. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier. The amount of heavy water they were trying to move using that ferry was quite small, and it really wouldn't have done much for the nuclear program. Plus, some of the barrels floated up, which meant they weren't full. And finally, they did some testing a few years ago that showed that the amount of D2O in those barrels was not very high. Meaning, again, these barrels were not likely to really have helped the Nazis with atomic development.
Yeah, right. But these barrels were submerged for decades, and they did indeed contain heavy water. How do we know they really did have heavy water in there of these barrels? Well, there's a series of episodes on YouTube and Disney Plus called Drain the Ocean, and they seek out shipwrecks and with underwater digital mapping can drain the water away so you can actually see what the wrecks really look like. There is one episode available on YouTube now that covers this ferry boat recovery, and heavy water barrels were found. So look for Nazi Secrets on YouTube. It's fantastic. While other fjord water may have seeped in or not, who knows, but the thought of them shipping heavy water to Germany, well, that has to be stopped regardless of how much was in there and how much more they needed, because no one really knew that.
Well, that's true.
Right? So Germany could have already acquired some amount before, or could have had some in Germany. They didn't know. They had to stop it, and all they knew what they had to do was stop this shipment. So now we know.
One thing I really liked in the movie is the way they showed time with the collection of this water, with this thing that's dripping water. Yeah, just showing you, okay, we're collecting more heavy water. And throughout the movie, they show that. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So in reality, it's said that this combination of the Norwegian raid on the Telemark plant, the Allied bombing of the plant afterwards, and the sinking of the ferry with the heavy water delayed the German development of an atomic bomb significantly, and that is what allowed the Allies to win the war against Germany. We saw how quickly the war ended against Japan when the Allies dropped 2 atomic weapons on Japan. Imagine if the Germans had the upper hand and developed the atomic bomb first.
I would like to not imagine that.
So the Allies could not take a chance about the plant, how much heavy water was there. Who knew? They had to eliminate it.
Yeah,
and
that would have been scary.
Yeah. Operation Gunnerside remains a testament to courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice in the fight against Nazi Germany's nuclear ambitions and their ability to win the war. This had to be done, and you have to appreciate what the Norwegian resistance did and what the Allies did here.
Oh, yeah, some of the things they did in the real life mission were amazing that they didn't even get to show in the movie. But it was one heck of a mission, and it's nice that at some level they've memorialized it in the movie.
Yeah, while the Heroes of Telemark is a fictionalized version of the events, it provides an exciting portrayal of the resistance efforts to thwart German atomic bomb development. If you're interested in spy thrillers and historical dramas, this film is worth watching.
I'd
Without
agree.
doubt.
And there's also a TV series called The Saboteurs that was released in 2015 that also covers this whole sabotage scheme against this plan.
All right, that's a wrap. This has been Dan
And Tom.
of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Subscribe to our show and our YouTube channel as well. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it.